A significant winter storm is expected to develop in the Midwest by next week, where many of the bigger cities in the Midwest could get involved with extremely heavy snowfall and potentially blizzard conditions associated with this next winter storm. If we were to take a look at the latest depiction of the European model, of course, we have this storm system that pretty much has moved out of the United States. At this time, we're still seeing snow in the northern portions of Maine, but outside of that, the storm system is well to the northeast of you guys. However, behind it, we should see a pretty significant jet stream dip through the Midwest, so temperatures should be below average right behind this low pressure system. So as a result, you should expect colder temperatures for much of the Midwest as we approach the weekend, and we could see some snow in the higher elevations of the Appalachian Mountain ranges as we approach the later weekend, where we do see a low pressure system develop as a result of this jet stream dip, where we do see quite a bit of convection going on and an enhanced area of thunder shower activity, and we do see heavy snowfall in the higher elevations, but outside of it, it should primarily be a rain event for much of the East Coast. However, if we were to continue to move forward into next week, we see that for the most part, this week should begin out as mainly dry. However, we do have the slow pressure system that's going to move down the California coast, bringing some cold air with it, and that's going to set the stage for an unstable environment to develop in the midsection of the country. And we're going to see another low pressure system come off the Pacific Northwest coast with plenty of cold air behind it. And of course, that's going to interact with the very warm temperatures we're seeing in the midsection and in the eastern half of the country, where we still do see that very persistent ridge dominating much of the eastern half of the United States, bringing those temperatures up. And as that cold Arctic air interacts with the very warm and moist air, we're going to see, of course, a highly convective environment to where a storm system should develop in the Midwest as early as midweek on Wednesday. And we could see some snow on the northern side of this low pressure system as it continues ahead further northward. For this first low pressure system, the certainty is definitely higher than the next low pressure system that's expected to bring the significant winter storm conditions to the Midwest. However, we have to keep in mind that this is still around 5 days out, so there still could be trajectory changes with the forecast, and maybe the snow could move a little bit further southeast, where we have to wait and see how much cold air there will be just to the northwest of this low pressure system. However, the main low pressure system that's expected to bring the significant winter storm to the Midwest will be this one that's located in the Four Corners at this point, where we do see the snow move quite a bit further southward into Arizona, New Mexico, a large portion of Colorado, and Utah also gets involved with very heavy snowfall. And even the higher elevations of Nevada and California get a little bit involved with snowfall associated with this low pressure system, which really goes to show how much cold air will be behind this trough. And if I were to continue to move forward, we eventually will see that cold air interact with the very warm and moist environment located in the surrounding the Gulf Coast states, and we see a significant winter storm develop, bringing heavy snowfall to much of Oklahoma, the northwestern portion of Texas, a large area of Kansas and Missouri as well. And not only that, we do see this storm become quite formidable, where we see the low pressure system drop down to 992 millibars, which is quite low and will only get lower as this storm continues to head further northeastward and interacts more interacts more and more with a more unstable environment. And we do see very heavy snowfall in Chicago in this scenario as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see blizzard conditions associated with this trough, since the millibar pressure is so low. That's going to force a lot of the air molecules to filter into the very low pressure we're seeing right around the center of circulation. So as a result, I wouldn't be surprised if we see winds that are gusty enough to create blizzard conditions for much of the Midwest, depending on where exactly the heaviest snow will fall, which still has yet to be seen. We do see in this scenario very heavy snowfall in Chicago, northern Michigan, a large portion of Illinois. St. Louis gets a little bit involved with snow, so does Kansas City, as this would impact millions of Americans. And we do see a large area of Michigan get involved with very heavy snowfall, as again, this has a very mid-latitude cyclone look to it, where we're seeing that, of course, that well-defined bow echo associated with this trough. So it really goes to show how organized this low pressure system is expected to be as it approaches the Midwest. So we're going to definitely need to pay close attention to this over the next several days. At this point, the European model wants to bring quite a significant snowstorm to much of the Midwest. And in a lot of these areas, which include the bigger cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City, however, the GFS model still is showing a pretty different scenario, at least when it comes to the trajectory of this low pressure system. While the GFS model does expect that a similarly strength low pressure system will move into the midsection of the country by next week, what it's disagreeing on heavily compared to the European model is where exactly that heaviest snow will fall, because GFS model wants to bring the trough a little bit further northwestward, which would bring the heavier snow further northwestward into more of the Dakotas and Minnesota, rather than southward into Oklahoma, Missouri, or Chicago and Michigan. So there's definitely something we're gonna need to keep in mind over the next several days when making these forecasts, which computer model will eventually cave into the different scenario. We have to wait and see. At this point, I'll still lean a little bit more to European model, because the European model been a lot more reliable this winter than the GFS model, but we can't rule out the GFS model either. Now let's take a look at the GFS model's forecast. The GFS model, at least for the first few days, is showing a scenario that's very similar to what the European model is suggesting at this point. We do see a formidable low pressure system develop just off the southeast coast, bring some snow in the higher elevations, but not much more than that. And continuing to move forward with the forecast, we see a similarly strength low pressure system take a similar trajectory to the European model, at least for this first trough that's expected to move through by the midweek, by around the Tuesday to Wednesday timeframe. But the GFS model does expect a little bit more snow than the European model, since it does expect the northerly winds to be a little stronger. So in many areas of Minneapolis and a large portion of Wisconsin, you would experience snow rather than rain, according to what the GFS model is forecasting. However, the big difference comes with this second trough that's of course expected to move in by the Wednesday to Thursday timeframe. We're still seeing snow in a lot of the same areas. However, a key difference is that the low pressure system doesn't move as far south as what the European model is forecasting. And the reason why is because the European model the GFS model doesn't forecast the jet stream dip to be as significant, because it doesn't expect the ridge that's expected to be just to the west of this storm to be as strong. So as though we don't see the jet stream dip as strong, so we see more of a westerly direction rather than a northerly direction to push the storm further southward. So the snow stays relegated well further northward to many of the areas that the European model wants to bring snowfall, where we do see that by the later Wednesday timeframe, much of the heavy snowfall is well to the north of Oklahoma and Texas, where we see the heaviest snowfall, more focused in on the extreme northern portions of Kansas, Nebraska, and of course the Dakotas and into Minnesota as well. And we see that in many of the bigger cities that experience snow in the European model scenario, experience rain in the GFS model scenario, where we do see that Chicago and Missouri, it's entirely a rain event, as it seems like the southerly winds will be a little bit too strong to a point where it'll raise the temperature a little bit too much for you guys to experience snowfall in this scenario. And we do see more snowfall in Minneapolis and compared to what the European model is stating. So either scenario would bring a significant snowstorm to the United States. What really will be the key factor we're going to need to pay close attention to over the next several days is where exactly that low pressure system will build. The GFS model also expects a weaker storm system as a result of a weaker jet stream dip. Of course, during a scenario where the jet stream winds are weaker, or at least the jet stream dip is weaker, that means the instability is weaker. So this storm would be a little bit less significant compared to what the European model is stating, but still enough to dump a large area of 3 to 6 to potentially 6 to 12 inches of snow in more localized areas. So there's definitely something to pay close attention to into next week. And yeah, like I said, the reason why the GFS model is forecasting more of a northward track is that the jet stream dip isn't as significant. So the southerly winds that are associated with the jet stream dip aren't, or at least the northerly winds associated with the jet stream dip, aren't as strong to push the slow pressure system further southward to the point where it'll impact the areas further southward. And as a result, it'll turn northward a lot at a position where the low pressure system is a lot further northward than what the European model is forecasting. So as a result, we see the snow relegated well further northward. We're really going to need to determine how significant this jet stream dip will be to determine where exactly the heaviest snow will fall, and of course how powerful this low pressure system is, because the stronger the jet stream dip, the more likely the areas further southward will get involved with some snowfall, while the weaker jet stream dip would bring less snowfall to much of the southern United States, and would primarily be a rain event for a lot of those areas. So definitely something to pay close attention to over the next week. Now let me show you guys the 500 millibar height anomaly to better exemplify this point. So this is what the European model is forecasting when it comes to the 500 millibar height anomaly. We do see that the jet stream dip is quite significant, and we do see that there's just enough of an open area in the Midwest to allow this storm to move further eastward and southeastward to the point where this would bring snow to many areas further southward into Chicago, Milwaukee, a large portion of Michigan, and even portions of Kansas City, St. Louis. And in this scenario, the jet stream dip is significant enough to bring snow to Oklahoma and Texas as well, which is definitely a stark contrast when we take a look at the GFS model. And we do see, and another thing I want to point out is that look at how strong this ridge is just to the west of this low pressure system. And since the eastern portion of this ridge will bring the strong northerly winds, that's forcing this low pressure system to move further southward to bring the snow further southward as well, and produce a more significant jet stream dip for this storm to be a little bit more intense, which is definitely different than what the GFS model is stating, which I'll show you guys right now. So this is what the GFS model is forecasting, and definitely a pretty significant difference. We see that there's a lot more ridging located further westward, which means that this storm would move a little bit further northward than what the European model is forecasting. And the jet stream dip is more spread out, but moves less southward. So as a result, we see the storm move a little bit further northward than the European model, and it brings a little bit more snow further northward and more of a rain event for the areas further southward. And we do see there's a lack of ridging located in the western portion of the United States to pull this low pressure system further southward. So as a result, we see the areas further northward experience more snowfall from this scenario. We clearly see the difference that the ridging plays a role in when it comes to snowfall accumulation, because in the European model scenario, where it wants to take the trajectory further southward, we see a very significant snowstorm for the Chicago area, where Chicago in this scenario would experience over close to, if not over, a foot of snow. And we do see that this extends into Iowa as well, where you could experience over a foot of snow. St. Louis gets a little bit involved with snowfall, but very close to experiencing 6 to 12 inches in this scenario. Kansas City experiences 6 to 12 inches, as well as Oklahoma and the northwestern portion of Texas experiences 3 to 6 to potentially 6 to 12 inches. And we see also much of the higher elevations of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and even Utah experience well over 6 to 12 inches of snow. So this would be a significant snowstorm for millions of Americans, but it's definitely a different scenario when we take a look at the GFS model's scenario. There's a snowfall accumulation forecast the GFS model is forecasting within the same time period, and we see very different scenario. Much of the heavier snowfall is more focused in on the Dakotas and Nebraska and Minnesota rather than Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, where in this scenario, pretty much all these areas experience entirely a rain event, and we still do see snow in the four corners, especially in the higher elevations, but definitely a very different scenario. So we're gonna need to pay close attention to how the trajectory changes over the next several days and how this jet stream dip will build by next week. I'll keep you guys updated. So at this point, this is where the European model expects the worst of the snowfall to occur, right in between Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. There's still that possibility the snow could move further northward and lean more to GFS model scenario, but I'm leaning a little bit more to a European model because, like I said before, it seems like it's been the more reliable model. But remember, this forecast is certainly subject to change over the next several days, so make sure to stay tuned. I will say that a major winter storm for the Midwest is likely. It really all depends on where that heaviest snow will fall, and I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. But thank you guys for watching.